Adventures in the Forgotten Realms seeks to pack decades of D&D flavour into a single magic set, and it is pulling out all the stops to do so. So, whilst we fumble through our knowledge of D&D lore, let's take a look at the new mechanics and set themes that will merge these two titans of fantasy. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And it is finally time to talk about Adventures in the Forgotten Realms proper. Last week we did a little bit of a look at Adventures in the Forgotten Realms through the eyes of what it means to be as a core set. We didn't talk too much about the set as a whole or its flavour as a whole, so much as sort of individual things that interested us because it took up the core set slot in the year. Whereas now we're going to be doing two Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms episodes. This week we're going to be doing what would be akin to our world building episode, and sometimes do like a mechanical episode. This is kind of this merged together because magic sets are a lot easier to digest in like an hour and a half on a podcast, whereas I don't think we could talk about the entire lore of Dungeons and Dragons, or even the entire lore of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, or Faerun, or any part of anything in Dungeons and Dragons in the space of an hour. So we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to be looking at the cards and the mechanics and the flavour of the set through the lens of how do we think this relates to Dungeons and Dragons, speaking as people who are predominantly Magic players, but also have like half a foot in Dungeons and Dragons as well. And then next week, I think we'll do our Flavour Picks episodes, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah. Where we actually look at individual cards.
Yeah, there's a lot of broad strokes to go by, and we'll probably look at a few cards specifically today, but not in terms of like, oh my god, this is my favorite card in the set because of this reason. More like, okay, this is an example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just, I mean, again, like when we have new Magic sets set in new locations, like when we went to Strixhaven, for example, they would do maybe 1-2 articles fleshing out the world, and then anything they don't put in those articles would be in like story or story articles or flavor text or the cards themselves. But really, you're looking at sort of a very finite world building structure that we as Magic players can dive into. If you then try and do these IPs, especially one that's been going for as many decades as Dungeons and Dragons, and then be like, right, we're going to cover the flavor of D&D, it's just impossible. So we are not going to try and attempt that, and we will probably get stuff wrong even in the stuff that we do attempt. Just to give the broadest of broad strokes as to what the Forgotten Realms are, just so we know what we're talking about here. So Dungeons and Dragons is a system rather than a specific setting. It does have lore, but when you talk about Dungeons and Dragons, you're talking about the system of how you play the tabletop RPG. The Forgotten Realms is the campaign setting, which is mostly set on the planet of Toril, which is like the Dungeons and Dragons, or one of the Dungeons and Dragons planets. And usually the Forgotten Realms focuses on several continents, most notably the continent of Faerun. And Faerun is kind of like the sort of catch-all fantasy setting where most Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, especially if you're playing ones from like things like source books or from like self-contained modules, if you're a new player to Dungeons & Dragons, chances are you've been playing in Faerun, which is on Toril, which is part of the Forgotten Realms, which is part of this big celestial body of all different things Dungeons & Dragons. So when we tell you that Dungeons & Dragons is big, it is big. And there's lots of different terms of like different realms and planes of existence and dimensions and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, Forgotten Realms, essentially, all you need to know is a cluster of locations set on the planet of Toril. And if you have heard of any of them, it's going to be Faerun. I mean, is that your experience of Dungeons and Dragons? What I've just said there, in general?
Yeah. It's like trying to make Magic the Gathering the set. Like that's not a thing you could you talk about in the same way that D&D has its own, as you say, pockets of lore and pockets of story. It is obviously a wider. It's almost like a canvas, right? Of where they've gone. We've painted plenty of the canvas. There's also plenty of the canvas left blank for us to fill in if we want to. So yeah, again, it's and as you said, the best way to say it is a system. It's a well-building system, which is fantastic. It means it's ever growing, and it means that probably in a few years' time they'll be able to do something like this again and still have plenty to pull from.
Sure.
From what in my experience, I don't know the adventures that I've played. Like say for example, Castle Ravenloft. I don't know exactly where that was. Like without off the top of my head, for example, but none of it feels like it's outside of its own, outside of a typical fantasy parameter, right? There's no steam. I mean, maybe there is. Is there like a steampunk world of that? I mean, this is where my knowledge kind of falls flat, right? Of where I feel like Magic has everything from Kaladesh to Innistrad, whereas I don't know if D&D has quite the same breadth. It has way more depth. Don't get me wrong; like it's got way more depth, but I don't know if it has the same breadth in terms of like artistic direction of what the worlds can be or what they can do. You don't have like a neo future kind of realm, right? Whereas in
No,
Magic,
they're mostly high fantasy. Yeah. So, well,
Exactly.
Ravenloft is connected to the Forgotten Realms by way of an ethereal plane. So it is part of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, but it's not necessarily set in Faerun, for example. You would go off because it's like the gothic horror sort of setting, right? So this is what we mean, like how there are a lot of locations that are super like relevant, and they can be very easily accessed through other places in Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, there are I've listened to people who are super invested in Dungeons and Dragons try and pass a lot of this information, because we're talking about information for like decades and decades worth of lore and world building. Much of it can be ignored if by choice, like in your campaign settings, if you're a dungeon master like writing a campaign. So, and even like these people can't pass a lot of this information succinctly, right? So I think it is meant to be much more collaborative and much more like loose and malleable than say magic lore, where we're like, well, what do you mean like something can't planeswalk like unless it has a spark? Or, oh, hang on a minute, how come that thing planeswalk between the realms when it doesn't have a spark and it's made of stone? Like, it's this kind of thing, where we want really definite answers in Magic the Gathering. I think Dungeons and Dragons can kind of play around a lot with its lore. Or at least that's my experience of it. You mentioned Cast Ravenloft. I think that's because in the house which we shared over uni, although I don't think we actually ever lived in the house at the same time. It was just part of our friendship group. The house just kind of
No,
passed around us all.
we were ships passing in the night.
Yeah, it's weird. Like that house was part of our sort of lives for about 7-8 years, like before, during, and after uni, and like about 5-6 different pods of people moved in and out. There was a box of the Castle Ravenloft board game, which kind of like Dungeons and Dragons light, set in the kind of like it's kind of its own little module, but with like more board game mechanics than say straight up D&D. And then we've done a few D&D campaigns with different source books and this, that, and the other. And I've had a couple of campaigns with some friendship groups outside of like our Magic Play group as well. So yeah, interesting. I'd love to know from my DMs like what they're pulling from, or if it's like completely new. But I'm pretty sure most of what I've played is based in Faerun, with some notable locations. But yeah, so I think it's easier if we just kind of focus on the cards and the mechanics and what we've been given and how we think they represent what little we know of Dungeons and Dragons. Apologies to any of the massive D&D nerds that are out there that listen to this podcast. We are definitely novices in the field, but we're going to give it a go. So yeah, Nathan, you've got a lot to sort of talk about in terms of your approach to it. So why don't you kick us off, and I'll kind of jump in as and when.
Okay, well, let's start at the top of Mythic Explorer, because this is one of the big kind of, and we've already kind of talked about this a little bit in terms of like moving between realms and moving between planes. Let's talk about the Planeswalkers, because they serve a very different functionality within like, or not necessarily different functionality, but they represent a different type of character within this set than they do in typical Magic. Obviously, typical Magic talks about Planeswalkers as if they're like spacemen bouncing between planets, and there is a degree of that within D&D, but the ability to pass between planes isn't something that only a certain few people can do. I mean, not everyone can do it, but it's not it's something that anyone could potentially learn, right? It's something
you don't need an innate spark or an innate soul to do it.
Precisely. And it's funny that the representation we've got across, so we've got one for each colour, right? We've got Grandmaster of Flowers for white, Mordenkainen for blue, Lolth, Spider Queen for black, Zariel, Archduke of Avernus for red, and Elowick Tumblestrom for green. And they all kind of represent slightly different qualities of character. Starting with Grandmaster of Flowers, he's essentially the human representation of Bahamut, who is the good dragon, the brother to Tiamat, who's like the goddess of like the evil bad dragons, chaos dragons. And what's quite interesting is that we see almost like deified characters in the Planeswalker role between Grandmaster of Flowers, Lolth, and Zariel. They're kind of like various different high-ranking arch like devils or queens or goddesses or gods and that kind of thing. And that's kind of how they're kind of treating these Planeswalkers. They can kind of exist across planes based on their worshippers and that kind of thing, which I think's really interesting. Whether or not Grandmaster of Flowers is maybe flavorfully correct to call Bahamut, in my little bit of research, I don't know, is questionable, because apparently the Grandmaster of Flowers is a title given to the senior member of the Monastery of the Yellow Rose, which Bahamut never was, from what I can tell. So it's funny that they've managed to they've taken different aspects of D&D lore and kind of wrapped it all together into a character, because he has a static ability as long as it has 7 or more loyalty counters on him. Bahamut's a 7/7 god creature with flying and indestructible. Sorry, dragon god creature with flying and indestructible. Being a very strong static ability, kind of representing his different forms. In the picture on there, he's got 7 canaries, gold canaries, flying around him. He's always within the stories of D&D represented by having 7 followers, whether it's a carriage being drawn by 7 horses, or having 7 dogs, or having 7 canaries. These are polymorphed gold dragons, which is really, I just love this idea of this, like, look, this dude just walking down the road with these seven birds, someone coming attacking him, and then just this, out of nowhere, this canary just polymorphs back into a gold dragon and attacks the person, which I think is really, really funny. I like the idea that you can only turn into a dragon when he's got the 7 loyalty, which represents the 7 followers. Again, maybe there's a question of why he's represented by a younger character, when in the lore it was supposed to be an older character.
Yeah,
and then,
it's like an old man that they're usually sort of depicted as.
Yeah.
In form.
Right, so they've kind of taken some artistic license, not only with how to flex these characters into Planeswalker cards within Magic, because obviously Planeswalker means a very specific thing within Magic, but they've also kind of been a little flexible with kind of how they have approached the character design. I think a lot of the cards, a lot of the characters or specific items that we'll see, and we'll talk about this kind of going through the episode, they've done a really good job of doing top-down design of where they've gone, okay, let's highlight all of the things that make this character, put them onto the card, so it's, you know, the best representation within Magic of this character. And all these different people that have interact or have had interactions with Bahamut or know of Bahamut in the lore of their own campaigns will be able to look at the card and go, oh, okay, so that's what they're going for here. Oh, okay, that's what they're going for there. I'm not entirely sure about the monks being linked in with them. That's something that maybe goes over my head a little bit. Maybe that also plays into the Grandmaster of Flowers, kind of at least tying him to a more grokkable Magic kind of mechanic, which is white weenie, right? I get dudes, they protect me, and then once I've got enough dudes and protecting me, and then I can become this big threat, play into the game. Cool, mechanically fantastic.
Zariel's a really interesting addition to the Planeswalkers, because devils and demons in Dungeons and Dragons are kind of flipped round to their representations in Magic. So whereas in Magic, the demons are the ones that are the kind of contract-laden lords of the pit who entice people through fear and sort of beguilement, and then devils are the kind of cheeky, mischievous, like poke you in the back with a pitchfork kind of idea. In D&D, it's very much reversed. And Zariel, being the red planeswalker in this section, is a devil, so is like what we would understand as being a bit more demony and a bit more sort of like conniving. And they're the lord of the first circle of the 9 hells in the Forgotten Realms. And their patron is Asmodeus, who is the kind of overarching lord of the devils and lord of the 9 hells, who is a black legendary creature in the set, which I think is kind of interesting. So it's sort of, I wonder if because they're using these planeswalkers to kind of represent the kind of archetypical colors of like what they think creatures or characters in D&D would be as planeswalkers, what colors they would be. But we have the devil character who would be black if they're a legendary creature, but if they're a planeswalker, they're red. I sort of think that's an interesting flip around.
I guess it's right. So personality-wise, right, this is maybe where we can start looking at magic mechanics or magic ethos in terms of color identifying for planeswalkers. Zariel is a warmonger, has been a warmonger, got almost addicted to war. Basically, so she's a fallen angel. Also, really funny that it's the first angel planeswalker we've had in a Magic card, and it's represented by a red kind of archdevil, because I mean it is a fallen angel. It's quite obviously, again, souls and sparks don't necessarily work the same way in D&D as they would necessarily in Magic. Obviously angels are constructs of white mana, so they can't innately have a spark, which is why we haven't seen an angel planeswalker. Sarah isn't in herself an angel, despite what what people might think looking at a card and seeing all the the featheriness of her. But obviously Zariel is her representation, or her mind is such a warmonger, and obviously all of her abilities match that. So yeah, I guess even if she is a black or like an evil, whatever you want to say in terms of maybe she should have been a black card, everything about her nature is red, right? This idea of like, yes, okay, it's not just the passion and the terrible lukewarm passion quote thing for new Magic card, for new red cards, but red is also the color of battle, the color of strife, and that kind of thing. So I can see why
I think you're right. I think color is very much treated in this set as if it's something to do with like your alignment, right? So in Dungeons and Dragons you have like true neutral, like lawful neutral, chaotic neutral, and chaotic good, like lawful evil. You have this kind of spectrum of all these different alignments that you can have that don't necessarily always have to follow, say, your class or your race or whatever. It's kind of it makes up the patchwork of what your character is and what it can do. So I think you're right that we'll see also on non-legendary creature cards and just all creature cards in general, the colors definitely just seem to be relating to more of like what they feel like as a character, as opposed to trying to define things as like, oh no, this is the green blue clan, or this is, these characters are always red or they're always black. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
No. Well, I mean, obviously, the Magic color system, as much as it is supposed to balance and have different styles of gameplay, is also supposed to balance, the different ethics and morals of characters and that kind of thing. So it's quite interesting to see them try and communicate other IPs into that as well. Lolth, not much to say about her. She's a demonic spider queen. She's a goddess of the Drow. The idea
there's a
being
lot to
that.
say. She's the goddess of the Drow, who are the Dark Elves. Like, she's the goddess of the whole race.
Well, the things
D&D.
I did a lot of. Yeah, but the thing is, right. So I'm talking about from from a looking at it as Magic set point of view. Lolth's lore and history is extensive, right? But none of that's on the card.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I look at it. Is like, okay, as a baseline magic player, I look at it and go, right, so whenever a creature dies, put it all together. So, okay, so she benefits from all of the infighting that she caused between the Drow, and she likes people, culling the weak is kind of her thing, right? She doesn't make her followers just go, oh, we'll love each other and love me. It's like, no, you fight. You fucking fight, guys, to be the strongest you can be to worship me, which is why, obviously, she gains a loyalty counter whenever a creature you control dies. Makes sense, cool. She's got the basic draw a card, lose a life ability for black, meh, whatever. She makes spiders, cool, meh, whatever. And then her ultimate, okay, cool, has a tie ability, ties into the number 8 because, spiders have 8 legs and 8 eyes. Cool, a little bit whatever. I mean, the thing I find interesting is that because she is, a deity and she's believed and she can kind of manifest across different places, that's kind of maybe what gives her that, legendary planeswalker status.
Yeah.
And again, who would you give it to otherwise, unless you did, Asmodeus or something like that, as you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
I think she's really cool, really creepy. The alternate artwork as well is particularly creepy, getting massive shouldered vibes from her. But yeah, I mean, it's more a matter of I don't. I mean, as much as cool, deep demon queen, deep demon goddess is cool. I don't think necessarily a card does as much favor to her as much as being just an efficient black magic card.
Sure.
Similarly,
do you know what the Drow spider creatures are called in Dungeons and Dragons? Colloquially, in Dungeons and Dragons, they're called Driders.
That's it, yeah, yeah. Well, isn't there a Drider? There's a Drider in the set, isn't there?
There is a Drider in the set. I just thought it was funny. It was like, oh, what's this creepy name they're going to come with? Oh no, just a portmanteau of spider and drow. Okay.
Yeah, drow and Drow and spider.
Drider.
Yeah,
all
great.
Right.
Yeah, and they do look really creepy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously, if you're acrophobic or whatever, then this is going to give you the willies. But yeah, very cool to see her represented. I mean, again, if you're going to put anyone at the top of the black pecking order, I think she's a good one to go for. Mordenkainen makes more sense to Planeswalker. He was a mage, a spellcrafter, a very prolific spellcrafter, like someone who made a lot of spells. Used to travel around in his Tower of Urn, which is a multiversal kind of like travel ship kind of thing, which obviously makes sense for his planeswalker ability, planeswalker status. Eventually went completely crazy, went completely mad. I like this idea, like draw 2 cards, put one of them from your hand on the bottom of your library, kind of plays into that madness theme. Then his ultimate, exchanging your hand and your library, kind of also has this kind of weird madness thing of going so deep on the knowledge, enter the infinite being the card that this kind of represents. Then his middle ability, create a dog illusion. That's literally something you could do. You could create a dog illusion. So
and
these are the kind of
dog
things,
token in the set, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and this is what I think is quite nice, right? Is where you go, let's see the character, what spells do they know, put the spell on the card. Whereas I guess maybe for Mordenkainen it's a little bit more succinct than say Lolth, where okay, cool, you make some spiders. Of course, you make spiders. She's the spider goddess.
Yeah.
So maybe that's when I went a bit more whatever for her.
I mean, the Mordenkainen is a good example of expanding out of the Forgotten Realms and things, as you say, very multiversal, because they're from a place called the Grey Space, which is different to Realm Space, which is where Toril is. So it's like a different celestial plane in the cosmology of Dungeons and Dragons. So it's like, it's if you zoom right out, if you're just looking at like the galaxy in which all of Dungeons and Dragons is in, and then you zoom into like Realm Space, you're like, oh yeah, there's Toril, and you zoom out a bit again and you go back into Grey Space, you're like, oh yeah, there's where Mordekainen's tower is, and like he's in that area. So yeah, I think out of all of them, I think they're probably the most planeswalkery of them all. I agree.
Yeah, right. And then we've got now that's funny because now we move on to Elowick Tumblestrom.
Right,
who
yeah.
Arguably might even be more typical Planeswalker because she wished herself to have the ability to travel between planes, and so she's known as the greatest bard of the multiverse. Obviously,
Mm.
multiverses. We've got a Magic multiverse. There's a D&D multiverse. There's loads of different multiverses. Whether or not she will come into the main game proper, I think is probably unlikely. But she's kind of like almost the our audience port into the set, right? Of where we follow along her journey alongside Hammer Pashar, Nadar, who's the paladin, the Dragon King paladin, and then Varys Silvery Moon Ranger. These are the 4 characters that we see on all of our. What are we calling these cards? Because I have them as decision. I put them decision cards.
Sure. Well, they like these cards. There's loads of them. They sort of are the story spotlight cards of the set, right? Even though there's no narrative, like they're the narrative cards that you can kind of follow through. I suppose narrative cards.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's that point in D&D where you come to a fork in a road. And as I say, there's a few of these cards. We spoke about this last episode as well. This idea of you choose one or two options, and it's quite nice to see them flavorly play on the, are you a coward in this moment or are you really bold? But anyway, beast in the wood for the trees here. The point being that Eloic Tumblestrom wished herself the ability to be able to travel between planes, is a bard. She's a gnome bard. Her abilities venturing into dungeons makes sense. You know, she basically represents the idea of you going and going out on an adventure. -2 to look at the top 6 cards and reveal a creature card from among them. If it's a legendary creature card, you gain 3 life. This idea of she's looking for companions, and the greater of a companion you are, the more benefit you are to the party. And then her ultimate, getting an emblem, getting a bonus for each dungeon you've completed. This idea that she's singing a song and the song gets better with every adventure that she completes. Burgy vibes, man. Massive Burgy vibes is what I get from this card. This idea of a singer who, or bard, you know, who gets stronger and better with the more adventure and the more she sees of the world and the more feats that she completes. I think that's really interesting. And again, this is maybe more grokkable as someone who's able to wish themselves the ability to travel between realms. Makes sense from a Planeswalker point of view, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting though that as a character, like sort of outside of the meta of the game, Eloic Tumblestrom's only, as far as I can tell, is only in this Magic set and then the 2021 D&D source book, The Wild Beyond the Witchlight. They're not like a legacy character. So when we were talking last week about like, well, is this a set for new players? Who's this drawing in? If you don't think that this is a set exactly designed to cross-pollinate between Magic and D&D players, you're fucking nuts. Because there's a brand new character that's brand new in a set and a source book at the same time. And they're like, oh, this is the face of like Dungeons and Dragons and Magic for a while. Like, oh, okay, fine, fair enough. You know, and they've also got access to the Deck of Many Things, which is one of the most iconic Magic items in the game. So
I think you either see a card on the end of her on the end of her looty kind of thing. I think that's the idea, right? Is that she had the lucky draw or something. There's backstory as to how she got her ability to planeswalk. I think part of it, to travel between realms. I think it came down to the Deck of Many Things. Like she had a lucky draw or something from it.
Yeah. You see the card in both of the Planeswalker artworks and also in the card Wish as well, where they're singing a song into a fire. You literally using the spell Wish. So
yeah, which is really, really cool. Because there's obviously Wish cards being cards that go and fetch you cards from outside of your outside of the game, typically from your sideboard. And it's almost this idea of where she's kind of singing into the cosmos, and she gets kind of her wish granted. It's a really cool, nice, succinct little combination. Also playing off of typical Magic mechanics. Wish boards being a massive thing since when they first came around, to be fair.
I don't like wish boards in Magic.
I mean, most people don't, right? I mean, and it's deliberately like banned in EDH, so we don't see it very often. But even like we didn't really talk about it as much when we talked about Strixhaven, but this idea of lessons were kind of like wishboard light, right? Of where you had a very specific number of options. And I didn't get to play the limited space or limited format, so I don't know if they worked particularly well there, but this one directly, instead of putting it into your hand, just getting to cast it directly from outside of the game. So a slightly different twist on it. Cool. If you're into that, you're into that. Fair enough. Speaking of which, though, if we're coming off the back of Eloic Tumblestrom, her main ability being venturing into a dungeon, I guess we should probably talk about some mechanics.
Yeah, sure. There's a big one right off the bat, which we just mentioned.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how I feel about this one. It's they keep doing like these mutate energy kind of abilities that are kind of, let's try something different that we haven't done before, that feels like it adds an extra layer of complicatedness to the game. Whether
Complexity,
or
is that the word you were looking for?
yeah, shut up. You know, I was like, I'm just gonna carry on with
How much
complicatedness.
coffee have you had
Sure.
this morning?
I haven't. That's the problem. All I've had is food and a glass of milk. But you know, so yeah, like is having. Well, I guess we should talk about first dungeons in general, right? So
Yeah.
these are cards that sit outside of the game. Of once you start venturing into a dungeon, there are 3 of them, and you sit them in your command zone, essentially kind of where the same place that emblems would sit. And whenever you trigger venturing into a dungeon, you move a room through it. Now, there were originally only 1, I believe, when they first started doing this. They were only going to do 1 dungeon. And then by the end of it, they've made 3. And I think when they first showed it, they showed all 3 of them at once. And people were like, oh, is that it? And then when you realize that every single card that says the word venture then has potentially every single ability on every single room that's within those 3 cards, you kind of realize why they probably stopped at 3. So the 3 are Lost Mine of Flavour, Tomb of Annihilation, and Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And they kind of all do like slightly different things. Like one of them's more like a hodgepodge of general good abilities. One of them's more like it feels more like a black. Like Tomb of Annihilation feels more like a black card, right? Of where you have these various little life losses or sacrificing things before you get to your demon at the end of.
Well, the
end
Tomb
of
of
the dungeon.
Annihilation is a pretty famous module in Dungeons and Dragons, where it's essentially you go in with your party, and it's designed to kill your party as quickly as possible. So it's kind of like what would you call it? Like arcade mode. So
Yes,
you're literally just going as far as you can, and that's why it's so punishing. Yeah.
And then Dungeon of the Mad Mage, again, similarly more of a hodgepodge. I mean, I like. The funny thing is, I like, in theory, I like them. The idea of them a lot because it does add this idea of this story element to your game, right? Of where not only are you playing the game of Magic, but you're also playing the game within the game. Of like, oh, maybe I can get to the end of the dungeon, and whether or not it's really super possible or not. Like I'm looking at Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and you've got to go through six ventures just to get to the end, and whether or not you can do that or build your entire deck around it, I'm not entirely sure. But it does add this kind of added. It's almost like a secondary objective to your game. Kind of reminds me a little bit of when you play like Kingdoms, when like in EDH, of where you have like different roles as the king or as the jack or as the citizen or as the knight, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I think they're really easy to pass, though. There have been some people that have been little bit let down by them, and yeah, there's only 3 of them, but yes, there's lots of different permeations. Or oh yeah, okay, you need to get through them. It takes a lot to get through a couple of them. But if you look at something like Dungeon of the Mad Mage, looking at it from a flavor perspective, I have no idea what Dungeon of the Mad Mage is referencing, and there's a bunch of references on it, like Murai's Graveyard and Runestone Cavern and Goblin Bazaar. No idea what any of that means. But just even the fact that it has dungeon level, lost level, deep mines, where you scry 1, scry 2, scry 3, that I immediately understand that you're going deeper into the dungeon of the Mad Mage, and as the deeper you go, the more knowledge you're collecting. And the fact that the ultimate, if you like, the last room is draw 3 cards and reveal them. You may cast one of them without paying its mana cost. That's you finding the secrets of the Mad Mage and being able to cast one of the spells. Like, I mean, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but passing it from this Dungeon of the Mad Mage is a module in which you're going to steal the secrets of the Mad Mage from his dungeon. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if I've hit that nail on the head or have got anywhere near close to it just from looking at this dungeon card, I think it's doing a good job,
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, Lost Mine of Fendelver is kind of the opposite side, right? It's kind of like your basic, you get into the cave, you scry 1, right? And then you have a choice of whether you go into the goblin lair or if you go into the mine tunnels, each of which has a different encounter. One of them gives you a red goblin, one of them makes you a treasure. And it's kind of like, it represents when you are playing D&D of where you don't always get to do the completionist thing. If you get to go and I do everything, I see every room. It's like, sometimes you have to make a choice of whether you go left or right, and then that will irrevocably have consequences for the rest of your adventure, right? And I guess, yes, you can then go back into and do the adventure again and take a different route and that kind of thing. But it's nice to see like your journey through. Like I say, Dungeon of the Mad Mage is really cool because you have so many options going down. And say each time you hit a new level, you scry, and then you have a choice of either left or right, and then left or right again. Again, yeah, I think it's a really nice. It adds an extra journey into the card, and again, it adds a little story element to the game, which I think is quite nice.
Yeah, it's a little bit like when we had a Courier, and we were maybe a little bit concerned that they were trying to evoke this idea of your monsters keep changing and growing and this, that, and the other through like 4 different mechanics that all seem to not really do the same thing, but we're trying to tell the same story, and none of them quite got it right. Whereas I think in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, the mechanic, the overarching theme is decision trees, because that's really what a game of Dungeons and Dragons is. It's a
Exactly.
narrative with a bunch of decision trees, and so you have dungeons, you have those choice cards, you got the D20 stuff, the dice rolling, which we'll talk about in a minute. Even like the planeswalkers being used is a decision tree, like which decision do you pick is going to affect your game. So I think all of these different mechanics are actually doing a very good job. They're doing a much better job at telling the story of Dungeons and Dragons than Mutate and Keyword Counters did in Ikoria, talking about your creatures being, evolving and being different, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I like them. What do you think of the look of these cards? Because there's been complaints that they look too plain, but I conversely think that they look exactly how they should look. They look like
the dungeons themselves, right?
Yeah, the dungeon cards themselves,
What?
like the artwork, if you like.
I think that's great. They've even got that little squares in the backgrounds that kind of show like you move. Like they couldn't have made this better unless like you the venture mechanic was like venture forward 4 spaces, right? And then the actual dungeons were like 16 by 16 grids, and you had to choose like your little game piece going forwards. I don't know what else they could have done to make it more flavor. I think they look fine. Yeah,
I think there have been some people, and like large commentators and just general chatter on Twitter as well. One of the things that was suggested would be that for people who don't know what the Dungeon of the Man Mage is that you have some sort of artwork, like maybe on the frame or on the border, which kind of gives away like what we're actually doing and where we are.
Oh,
whereas
I see.
I'm happy to have these look like those like dungeon tile sheets that you get, where you're using your minis if you have them to play out the stuff in front of you. Like, you don't need them for Dungeons and Dragons, but it's cool when you have them, and it's I think they look good.
Yeah, I think environments are mostly made up through your imagination, right? Anyway, unless like you have like very rarely will you have like the every room kind of like this is what it looks like kind of thing. So I kind of feel like it allows, because what if someone else, what if they do an image of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but somebody's played that goes, but that's not what I thought it looked like.
Yeah,
it's like when like Harry Potter came to the TV. Now no one knows anyone other than Daniel Radcliffe to be Harry Potter. But there's I think a lot of people when it first came out were like, well, what if it didn't look like how I wanted it to look like? Like what if I had it in my mind as something else, and I've kind of betrayed my own canon as it were. Yeah, I think. I mean, also, what space do they have to put it on the card? If it's in Dungeon of the Mad Mage, that's like you couldn't put more on that if you tried.
Yeah,
yeah. I think they look fine.
Yeah, I mean, Dungeons, thumbs up from me. Tell the story, do what they need to do.
Yeah. Cool. So next mechanic is, I guess dice rolling. I guess dice rolling is a mechanic, right?
Yeah.
I guess there's a question here about. I mean, flavor wise, I don't think fine. Like absolutely fine by me. I think it's interesting when you get moved towards the commander decks when they start messing around with outside of just D20s, right? If where you start looking at D4s, D6s, D8s, because that's a little bit closer to what D&D's like, right? Where certain things have a higher variance, whereas certain things are more certain of what you're going to get the result from. I feel like a D20 is maybe safe because we're used to spin down dice anyway, so D20 is
sure, and
you can then have more options, right?
So let's read out Djinni Windseer then. So you've got a 3 and a blue 3/3 creature Djinn with flying. When Djinni Windseer enters the battlefield, roll a D20, and it actually says D20 as well. And it then has 1 to 9, scry 1, 10 to 19, scry 2, and then 20, scry 3. So yeah, the higher you roll, the better, quote unquote, of result you get from what you're trying to do. And yeah, it is just like Dungeons and Dragons. Well, and obviously, as you say, having the other polyhedral dice in there does make sense, because you don't generally buy a D20 on its own. You buy like the polyhedral set, and then you have like your set all together. But I mean, really, like, come on, let's be really real. Most of everything you do in Dungeons and Dragons or any RPG is rolling a D20 if it uses a D20 at all. Like, some of them actively go out of their way to not use D20s because of how ubiquitous D20 is. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fine. Again, there are people complaining about the RNG that there's now been introduced to Magic, but like, oh well.
Yeah, again, it's taking the place of a core set that would have been boring otherwise. This is my argument for like these kinds of mechanics. From like, if you can't do a D&D set without rolling dice, and unless you get really complicated and you start going, because like you start using like D4s and D6s usually in combat. Imagine if every combat required you to roll a dice to judge exactly how much you're attacking or not attacking. And I guess that's them going, but if you're saying that variance is bad, then surely the other variance is bad. It's like, well, no, because you can play to your worst example. Like, say, for example, contact another other plane, 3 in a blue, And your options are draw 2, scry 2, draw 2, or scry 3, draw 3. Now, typically, ignore the perfect roll, right? Ignore the critical 20, right? So then you've basically got half the time you're drawing 2, the other half time you're scrying 2 and drawing 2. You're still getting base level draw 2 cards for an instant for 4 mana. That's what you should be looking at this
at common as well.
Exactly, and then you can then look at the potential, and this is where start looking at magic mechanics within like a RNG aspect of set the base level. I guess the annoying thing is if it's a permanent in play, right? It's hard for your opponent to play around, or it's hard for you to play into of going, okay, so I have to adjust whether or not I get this result or if I get this result, and your opponent can't then judge because then they have to go, well, if they get this result, I need to do this, and if they get this result, then I might need to do this. For me, that's more interesting. That creates more engaging gameplay. It makes you pay a little bit more attention, and it makes the game feel a little bit. Yes, maybe a little bit more unsetty of where you're not entirely certain exactly what's going to happen, but there's plenty of I don't think they've made the difference between rolling a 1 to 9 or rolling a 10 to 19 so different that it breaks the card, right? Or it makes it useless or it makes it broken, and then the chance of rolling a D20 or rolling a 20 on a D20 should feel exciting. And yes, it's not very often, which is why, again, I think it's good they did D20 instead of like D10, and being a roll of 10 is like this ridiculous extra ability. Like getting a 20 on a D20 is difficult. And it should feel like every now and again, like when you open up a mythic when you're drafting, that, you just got a little bit luckier this time. Like, will that affect actual tournament play? I don't know. I've not seen anyone really arguing that this can make tournament play difficult. I don't think a lot of the D20 cards are necessarily tournament playable. So
no, I think that's on purpose as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they're just there as fun. Remember when Magic just used to be for fun, and they made cards that were fun? Do you want to shut the fuck up about random number generation? Okay, cool. That's great. Awesome. Good chat. Good chat. I love it. Like, the dice rolling. I mean, I think I've already mentioned it on social, so I might as well mention it here. I'm going to be taking apart my Pippa Duchess of Dice deck because dice rolling is now maybe a little bit too pushed. And it might just be a little bit too good. Like, there's just 1 or 2 cards where I'm like, that kind of tips the silver bordered deck into being like one of those problem silver bordered decks, I think, or at least just a bit too consistent. So despite the fact that one of my established EDH decks has now got many more toys, I think is actually one of those really niche situations where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll move on from this mechanic then, especially with all the commander like other D stuff. Final question, I suppose, for you. Are you going to give 2 shits if someone uses a spin down rather than a D20?
Interesting. No, absolutely not. Don't care.
No.
Good job.
Cool.
Good job leading into it. Like, if fuck it, if you know your dice are slightly weighted and you can consistently do it, well done wasting 3 days of your life to be slightly more consistent at cards that aren't even that good. Sure.
I love the idea that all the dice for MTG Adventures in the Forgotten Realms are going to be true D20s. Like, big props for that. It's a really nice gimmick, but I remember playing pre-releases where people get fucking whinging at me about what kind of dice I roll to who goes first. I'm like, dude, we're playing for like £3 booster packs. Like, you just go first. You go first. I don't care.
Yeah, whatever. Exactly. I guess it's difficult that when the main D20 that they release, right, is a spin down, and yet a technical true D20 is not like that. It's kind of funny that they went, so you're aware of D20s because you use them all the time for your life totals, but actually that's probably not the dice you should be using for this thing that was automatically now in the game, and you already have access to all of these dice that could be used for it. Like, that's whatever. Come on, get over yourselves.
So again, I mean, there isn't actually much to talk about dice rolling. It is exactly what it is, and I think it's cool. Thumbs up again. Pretty good.
Yeah, I can't complain. Very rockable. I guess pack tactics, right? Is counts. I'm literally just going to do a thing that I didn't do already. I'm just going to check quickly the pack tactics.
Pack tactics is the new ability wording. I don't think it's a keyword ability.
Yeah, no, I'm just seeing if it's an ability specifically within within D&D, and I can't see it as being so immediately. The way I look at pack tactics, it kind of reminds me of when, how most interactions in D&D you can like have a choice to avoid conflict, and as a newer player you typically go, fuck it, attack it. That's kind of how I feel with pack tactics works. Of when your entire party just goes, I guess we're fighting then, and you kind of get like a little bonus because of it. I think that's cool. It has this idea of feeling like you're attacking as a party. I think Power 6 is interesting because they did what Ferocious was 4, Formidable was Power 8, and then they've kind of gone in the middle for this. They've gone Power 6 is probably okay because it was Power 5. It's like they've done all of the numbers now from 4 to 8. It's kind of interesting.
So to read Minion of the Mighty, for example, which is a red for a 0/1 kobold, it has menace and pack tactics. Whenever Minion of the Mighty attacks, if you attacked with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. So yeah, it's a reward for you just going, yeah, F it, let's just jump in. Which is, yeah, you and your party seeing a big old boss, and the first thing you do is like, yeah, run in. Just no matter what class you are, or like
Yeah,
how
what
many hit
level?
points you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter what the DM says, going, "Are you sure?" Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that
Okay.
question. As soon as your DM says, "Ask, are you sure?" Stop what you're doing and do the other
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. You run at the beast and you fall down a bottomless pit that was beneath a carpet. Well done. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it's also like glad you mentioned that because it's also nice to see kobolds never getting any other stat line than 0-1,
Mm.
but still managing to make them playable. Yeah, cool. It's not particularly complicated mechanic. I feel like it allows it adds that extra element, as I said earlier, of where a lot of, for me, D&D, as much as it is exploration and going through the dungeons, there is a lot of it is combat based, right? And this was a way to kind of add an extra, throw everything you've got into it. Let's promote action, because I guess with all
Mhm.
of these other abilities that are going on, it could kind of get very. I mean, I guess maybe I'm looking through. There are a lot of cards have like a lot of creatures have keywords, like first strike, double strike. There's a lot of combat tricks and stuff in the set. So clearly there is a lot of promotion for combat
Well,
being a big
what
part of
I'm
this.
noticing, what I'm noticing in this set, and this is to do with pack tactics, but it is kind of the overarching thing with a lot of the abilities that are going on. They are forcing you to actively do things. There's very little sit back and wait mechanics in this set. There's no like they haven't gone for like there's no walls. There's very little sort of like counter spell support and all this kind of stuff. It is they do want you to actively be making decisions at every single point in the game. And I think that's really cool because a lot of Magic, especially in things like Limited, is that once you have your blockers, and once you know that that person's got a kill spell in hand, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I guess we're just going to sit here until the round's over then.
Mm.
Whereas these decision trees and these like, I've got a card with pack tactics. Awesome. Put the minion down, swing with everything else that I thought I couldn't attack with. Now I get this thing going on. There's a lot of proactive action going on, which I think is only good in a limited environment and certainly good for the game of Magic. I mean, unless you're a die-hard blue player, and even some die-hard blue players don't agree,
Mm.
sitting back and doing nothing isn't what anyone wants to be doing in a strategy card game. So,
No,
yeah.
especially in like limited, especially within like a core set like this. This isn't. Yeah, like I feel like playing this set, like you want to get into all of the cards. You want all of your cards to be doing something. They've deliberately made a point of making all these cards do something. So it's not, yeah, as you say, it's almost like a waste of the set to not utilize all of these kind of idiosyncrasies and nuances that they've kind of put into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, cool. Was that it for the mechanics that they
I mean, other
introduced?
than
I think so,
I
right?
guess you could say like the flavor word abilities, but we spoke a lot about that last
Yeah,
week.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's mostly just the cards that have abilities that they then went, okay, let's add the D&D flavor to it to make it feel like it ties in more, and also kind of give we didn't say this, but it kind of shows off just how broad D&D is in terms of all of the shit you can do. In Magic, we kind of take it for granted that you write any number of words on the card and it's very easy for us to go, okay, yeah, cool, it does this thing. It's like Magic can do a lot of different things. Like
Mm.
cards can do a lot of different things, and to kind of spell name each of the different things on the cards kind of shows you just how many different things Magic does, but it also kind of shows off all the different spells and stuff that do exist within D&D as well. Not only on the spells themselves, but a lot of the naming conventions for cards as well. We did get, I'm sure I'm kind of like stealing your thunder a little bit. We did get a Magic Missile card, Andy.
No, yeah, we did, yeah.
You know, and I know you were kind of interested to see if whether or not we're actually going to see cards that specifically kind of representing specific spells or actions that you do. Again, like check for traps is one of my favorite cards in the set because as a rogue player, it's something I did more than anything else. So to have that
Mm-hmm.
representation is really really nice, really nice to see.
A lot of those kinds of cards, which are genuine spells in Dungeons and Dragons, or characters that I think they've really melded the magic and the D&D aspects of them, will probably pop up in next week's episode where we look at individual cards. But it is worth noting that yes, they have used not only those flavor word abilities to really evoke what things are doing, and also evoke them within the context of what the creature is doing as well. Like there are many enter the battlefield effects that are very similar, but because of the color of the creature that's doing it, or the kind of class of it, for example, like Grim Wanderer, for example, I've just spotted as I'm
Funny, yeah, literally got that in front of me.
yeah. So Grim Wanderer is 1 and a black for a Goblin Warlock 5/3 with Flash, and it has tragic backstory. Cast this spell only if a creature died this turn. Now, you could cast this spell only if a creature died this turn to about 4 or 5 other creatures in the set, but you might be able to give them a different flavor word ability, and then it suddenly gives it a whole different feel. Do you know what I mean? Like you could maybe then elect to give all of them tragic backstory, but it wouldn't necessarily have the same impact. So yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting thing. And
Yeah.
yes, giving cards like, we spoke about Power Word Kill was something that we spoke about. The fact that there is a magic missile card, the fact that there is the deck of many things, and they do whatever it is they do, does tell the story of Dungeons and Dragons whilst making them magic cards. But again, next week when we do our specific individual flavor picks, I know, for example, I will definitely be talking about Asmodeus, because I think it is perfect Magic the Gathering D&D cross-pollination design. And yeah, we'll definitely be talking about some of these spell cards for sure.
Yeah, I kind of want to not talk about the specifics, but it's also nice to see certain things like cards like Leather Armor or Great Axe, like some really what I put down as like vanilla cards. I did air quotes. Oh, it's been a while since I've done that. So like cards that if you saw in a normal Magic set, you'd be like, oh, that's pretty boring. And I've said this, I think I said this even last week, of where there are plenty of equipments and stuff in Magic sets that do sound boring. Like Trusty Machete out of Zendikar, for example, is a really good example. And they didn't shy away from. They went, no, you know what? Look, like leather armor's something you always start with. So why not have the first time that you equip it equips for 0? You know, well, I like this. I like that idea of where they go. We don't have to make everything super cool. We can just have the basic naming conventions and then add the flavor of the magic card on top of it, and it still be sellable, and it still sells itself quite nicely. Again, yeah, we'll probably look at that a little bit more next week.
Yeah, for sure.
Here we go. The next thing. Dragons. Can't have Dungeons and Dragons. We've talked about dungeons. Dragons. Not only is there a mythic cycle of and I did look all of them up, and they all have got ridiculous. I'm glad that they called Old Norbone, for example, because in the flavor text it lists her actual name, Claugillimata. I mean, it's like oh no. Asmarana Diconitis to Caldicor all over again, right? There we go. Yeah, having names that are really not grockable whatsoever. Like all 5 of them. I mean, I guess Imrith actually is called Imrith, and Icing Death I think has a different name. I think Imrith's the only one that's actually called that within the story. All of the other ones, these are kind of aliases, and they have much longer, more complicated names. But we did get one for each color of these super well known legendary dragons, each with very cool abilities, I think.
Yeah, and then we also got a cycle of like white dragon, blue dragon, black dragon, red dragon, green dragon.
Yes, exactly. Right? Like the base level kind of dragons, which in and of themselves, as a magic card, you look at a 6/6 or a 6-mana 4/4 flying wave, you're like, whatever. In D&D, every dragon's fucking scary. Like even lesser dragons are absolute. Like they will fuck you up. I mean, I think I've only faced one dragon in my entire time. It was a frost dragon, and all we could do was get it to leave us alone. I mean, there was no way we were coming any even close to killing it. So yeah, like it's funny to see, you know, a stat line that you're like, yeah, whatever. I guess it's kind of a semi-good finisher in limited. Whereas within D&D, it's like, oh my days, I think this is it. I think it's all over. 4 months of hard work and story building for nothing. But yeah, it's quite good to see a cycle. I think it would be remiss for them not to do so. I think they've deliberately pushed them in terms of what they are mechanically, because dragons are a bit boring now. Like we see them all the time, but I think each one of them has an ability that kind of goes, oh, okay, that's actually pretty interesting. Imrith, for example, having Ward. Oh, we didn't say that Ward is back in force in this set. We see it on various different cards with, as they said, they were going to various different abilities or payments that you have to pay to get around the hexproof. There's like a Ward discard a card in the set, for example. So we do see that back a lot more. But yeah, dragons. Just wanted to mention that there are dragons in the set.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we get Icing Death, Frost Tyrant, who's the white legendary. We've got Imrith Desert Doom, which is the blue legend. We've got Ebon Death, Draco Lich, which is the black legend. Inferno of the Starmount, which is the red legendary dragon, and Old Norbone, who's the green one. We also get Adult Gold Dragon, which is a 3 red white for a 4/3 flying lifelink haste, which is pretty cool. And obviously Tiamat, which is the big 5 color dragon god that was released with Tyler Jacobson and Chris Ronart as the 2. I mean, cool, what a double team to be doing artworks. Yeah,
Tiamat cool. Obviously being one of the most prominent characters in. Well, it's funny because I didn't realize how prominent a character it was. I knew Tiamat more from and Bahamut as names more from shockingly Final Fantasy, because you know I'm a massive Final Fantasy shill. It's interesting for me then to find out where these names came from and other IPs that use them and use the characters prominently and have like big lore to them. So that for me was quite an interesting thing to look into. Speaking of Icing Death has an ability of where when it dies, you create a equipment called Icing Death Frost Tongue. Specifically, the weapon of Dritz. I want to kind of talk a little bit broadly about Legends. We'll probably have one or two. As you said, you already want to talk about one next week anyway. The reason I want to kind of bring them up is that they did a really good job of top-downing some characters that are very prominent within D&D. Drizzt specifically being one of the I think one of the most well-known adventurers within the lore of D&D.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of books for Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, or for the Forgotten Realms. Sorry, not Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which followed the journey of Drizzt O'Durden. So yeah, and then the party of characters that kind of in and around. So yeah, probably the Dungeons and Dragons character as a protagonist.
Because I believe he also travelled with the dwarf, didn't he? Buena Battlehammer. Again, we're not the biggest up on D&D lore, so forgive us for the spots. And I will be going at length into Xanathar in next week's episode, so don't worry, I'm not ignoring our beholder. But it's interesting to see how they do top-down designs with certain people. Like, so Drizzt is known to have 2 long weapons, so of course he has double strike. He is also known to carry a figurine of wondrous power, which sounds really generic, but it's actually like a title to items that kind of turn into animals. And the one that he has turns into Guinevere or Gwenweaver. I'm sorry, pronunciation. Apologies.
Guinevere,
yeah. It's like when people like pronounce Pokemon names wrong. I'm like, you idiot! How do you not know how to say that? It's like complete flip side right now. I'm like, Guinevere, right? Like from Robin Hood, maybe that's what they go for. Anyway, makes a cat token because he has the cat that comes to battle.
from.
Oh, sorry, Arthur. I mean, goddamn, what's it? Maid Marilyn. How did I get those two confused?
Fucking hell. This is like our culture as well.
I know. I'm sorry. And then I like the so obviously double strike being he has 2 swords. The fact he makes a 4/1 because he has a cat creature that comes with him within the game. And then whenever a creature dies, if it had power greater than Drizzt's power, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the difference. I mentioned this because I'm looking through his wiki page. The way that I look at it is either the greater foe that he defeats, the greater he becomes, or when his cat, who is a 4/1 and he's a 3/3, when that dies, he gets so fucking angry that it makes him stronger. I couldn't tell which direction they were going for, but either way, it's evoking a very specific flavor to the character, as well as being, typical, Naya +1/+1 counter theme, cool, whatever. But I like the fact that they did this for him to specifically evoke like the things you go, okay, yeah, of course, this, and this one make up the character. Whereas they threw a load of other names at what is kind of what we call the signifier cycle. So within Limited, you usually have one uncommon dual color card that kind of is a signifier for what the archetype for that color combination will be. And they've thrown a load of different characters: Crydel, Targnar, Trelasara, Barrowen. These are all characters within D&D. They even made up some, like Hammer Pashar is the Azurius one. She's one of the characters that we see with Elowick and I've already forgotten their names. It's too many names in Magic. The Dragonkin Paladin and Vidrus. Is it Vidrus? Good. But the party that we have on our decision tree cards. So they're also on there as well. But you see, as I say, other characters that are known throughout D&D lore. And it's nice to have... I don't know why, but I like this trend of making the legendary uncommon creatures the signifier for the set, because it signifies a very specific ability. It usually means that you can probably build a pretty cool deck around them that's maybe a little bit budget or a little underpowered, or if you're doing like a pauper deck, for example, where you're using an uncommon legend and every other card in your deck is a common. These are really good for that because they do a very specific thing, or at least they do a couple of specific things. Like Barrowin's the black-white one. Yes, okay, it does the typical thing of bringing stuff back from your graveyard, but it also plays into the venture mechanic, which the Esper commander deck plays into massively anyway, so it's already getting some extra support there. But I do like the idea that you kind of give the uncommon cycle the legendary status, that allows each set to kind of flex into a whole commander deck that's based within that archetype, as well as just having it within the set.
When you mean signifier, you mean the archetype signifiers for like draft and limited.
Exactly, where you pick that uncommon and it kind of says, right, if you want to play blue and red, this is what blue and red will be doing as a combination. It tells newer players what the deck should be doing, and it also kind of helps tie your deck together with some extra potent kind of spice, as it were, because you can only play that card in that deck because you play those 2 colors. I just think layering in the legendary status and adding characters kind of gives us more lore within the set anyway, and makes it feel a little less ham-fisted than having a bunch of names of being like, oh, why is this random red card a legend?
Cool. We don't have much time left, so let's just talk about classes for a minute.
Mm.
So class is a new enchantment card type, which obviously is hugely evocative of Dungeons and Dragons. So in Dungeons and Dragons, not only do you pick your race and you might pick your alignment, you also pick your class. So in this set, we've got several enchantments that talk about class. We have cleric, paladin, wizard, warlock, bard, ranger, druid, barbarian, fighter, monk, rogue, and sorcerer. Some of them are monocolored, some of them are two-color combinations, and yeah, they just kind of have the range of all the different kinds of classes that are generally found throughout Magic the Gathering, throughout Dungeons and Dragons. I think is interesting the ones that they've picked, because these aren't all of them, right? And some of them seem really familiar to Magic players, things like wizard and maybe rogue and monk to a degree, although monk's never really been. I suppose we do have monks in Magic the Gathering, don't we? Specifically monks.
Mm.
But then obviously some of them are a lot more evocative, like Bard and Ranger and Fighter. I mean, obviously Bard is something that has now come into Magic the Gathering, which we'll talk about in just a second. But the difference, say, between a Sorcerer and a Wizard, which are two different classes in D&D and to have two different class cards, is kind of an interesting distinction. The way that they mechanically work is they're kind of a cross between sagas and level up, and I think this was one of the early designs for planeswalkers was relatively similar to this, right?
Mm.
So you have 3 stages on each one. When the class enchantment enters the battlefield, it has an effect. So, for example, the Warlock class is 1 black, and then when you cast it, it has, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. So that's now your static ability. Then you can pay 1 and a black to level 2. When it has, when this class becomes level 2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them to your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. And then level 3 is 6 and a black. At the beginning of each end step of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So it's you becoming better and putting more investment in time into the class that you've picked, essentially. And it does inform the way that you'll need to play, and it kind of adds this nice little spin. Say if we look at Warlock again, where in D&D terms, if you were to build a deck that has like dealing damage to each opponent or having things to do with your graveyard and this, that, and the other, you are most likely a warlock as opposed to a cleric who has 1/1 counter synergies and things like that. So it's kind of a nice little information back and forth conversation about what classes would mean if they were more relevant in Magic the Gathering as they are depicted in Dungeons and Dragons. And yeah, like sagas are cool, level up's cool. So having like a thing that's similar to both of them, I guess, is kind of nice, I think.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm right. It's cumulative, right? You don't lose the ability of each. You build on it, right? So you have each of the 3 abilities when you get to level 3, not just you
I
change the
think
ability.
so.
I think
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
right? I
yeah.
think it's cumulative, right? Cool. There was just a question I realized I hadn't looked it up, and I'm like, wait, actually, that's a good question. Also, it uses the art style of where like sagas do, of where it's not lateral. What's the opposite of lateral?
Horizontal? No, what? No. Oh, I
No,
don't know.
vertical. Good go.
Vertical.
Vertical. Jesus Christ. Vertical art style rather than having like the normal topical art style. Like I say with sagas, and whatever. Good God. Stop.
Level up.
Yeah, thank you. Great, amazing. So yeah, creature types.
Yes, creature types. So there are a bunch of new creature types in this set. We've got Bard, Beholder, Gnoll, Halfling, Hamster, and Tiefling. And then Citizen is a new one, although it's only new in terms of it's not now a token. So Citizen was on a token. You could create Citizen tokens, and now you can have it just as a creature type. This was one of the big questions leading into this set, was how they were going to deal with creatures and whether they were going to use magic creature types to evoke things in D&D or the other way around, and this, that, and the other. And obviously it's the other way around, right? So Tiefling was one of the ones where we're like, well, we have Azra, and although they're not completely similar, like they're not a complete analogy of one another, they are similar enough that I think you would get away with calling Tieflings Azra in a Magic D&D set. But they've elected to go with Tiefling, right? And Bard is a new one. People have been asking for bards in Magic for the longest time,
People,
and obviously
we've even been asking.
well, and we have, yes, yeah. I think it's a general consensus that if we can have things like noble, why haven't we had bard yet?
Yeah.
For example, and obviously the set to bring it in would have been this set, but I really wish they could have also had it in in Strixhaven, right? Like the Prismaria bards.
Yeah, it's strange that they knew they were going to be doing it anyway and then didn't add it in. I know they're trying to do this whole red wizards are shamans, but I feel like it's very, again, if you knew you were going to be doing it in the next set going forwards, I don't understand why. I mean, are we going to see bards in future sets? Yes, obviously, right?
Yeah,
Surely, So
maybe.
it is very strange. Maybe they wanted to separate out from maybe Strixhaven magic is different to what your typical bug because you're not actually playing an instrument. Maybe they want to tie it specifically to that. I don't know. It's very difficult to grok where they go and why they think certain things. Maybe it was just too late in the development and they went, fuck it, let's put all of the creature types in. Maybe they originally had tieflings as Azra and then they went, actually, let's just do it anyway. Why not?
I think it's interesting the ones that they've picked to introduce and the ones that they've sort of maybe they could have used something else and it would have been absolutely fine. Like, for example, Beholder, I can kind of see why they didn't just use Eye or Horror for a Beholder.
Sure.
So Beholders are the race of which, Xanathar belongs to. And there are several Beholder cards in this set. Xanathar is one of them, he's the legendary one, and then there are a bunch of other ones as well. But I think because Beholders are such an iconic villainous race, or like, Xanathar as a character is so iconic, it's interesting. I think it's good that they've put Beholder as the creature type because it kind of pays homage to the fact that Beholders are actually like their thing. They're not just an eye. Like, as much as like you could say, well, they're just a big floaty eye, surely. Like they have a lot more gravitas than that.
Yeah.
Whereas then something like Null, so Nulls are basically, they're like, if we have like Avon and we have like hound people like Einok on Khans of Tarkir or in Tarkir, the Nulls are like hyena humanoids, like big hulking hyenas essentially, which are like bipedal. I kind of feel like they could have just like hounded / dogged these people.
I'm surprised they didn't.
Yeah.
It's also interesting that they didn't go dragonkin, but they went for the dragonkin.
Yes, but I guess because at a base level, so so in Dungeons and Dragons, for those who aren't as aware, as clearly we're not, we have Viashino in Magic the Gathering who are like lizard people, and then in certain like sets, like they're like dragon kind of people. But in Dungeons and Dragons, it's explicitly stated that you do get humanoid dragons who are like the descendants of the dragons, but now they're more like they're bipedal and they don't have wings, they don't fly around. So yes, you could have given them dragon kind, but I think just because their genealogy is that they are dragons, like saying that they're dragon knight or dragon warrior or dragon bard is fine.
Yeah,
like
must be the Onin argument, right? Of where they're just cats anyway. It doesn't matter; they're not separating it out.
Well, yeah, I guess. Oh, Nagas and snakes again.
It's right. Well, there's snake. There are snakes within the set that are very clearly like humanoid snakes, and you're like, I'm surprised you didn't just give that Naga. Like, I mean, obviously. Anyway, we're not getting into this argument.
We're not getting into it again. The one that there's a term I wish would be dropped from fantasy, and I don't think it is really a big deal, but it's definitely something that I always kind of about, and that is the term halfling. I don't like halfling. I just don't like it as a term.
Yeah.
Half of something. I just know for every real world name for peoples where the word half is used, it's never in a good way. And I think it's interesting again that they used halfling for some of these creatures. Like the dwarves have their own thing. Like they've kind of escaped this little bubble. But if you have things like gnomes, halflings, hobbits, kithkin, like they're
and
all...
dwarves. And dwarves. Well, don't forget the OG dwarves.
Well, no, but this is what I'm saying. Dwarves have kind of their own thing. They've kind of like they are like they're shorter than humans, but they're still like their own sort of race, if you like. Whereas I think halflings and kithkins are very much just presented as they're little people, and you think that's just not a good.
Yeah, I think halfling and kithkin is halfling and hobbit I think are the same. I think kithkin were essentially Magic's version of halflings, and it's also weird they have both halflings and gnomes. I know that within D&D they are different races, but it's weird to have both within the same set when they're introducing kind of both into it. Because I'm all for creature diversity, but all it essentially does is make it more difficult in future when you try and do tribal, because either you make tribal a thing and you try and keep it succinct, or you don't really mind about tribal when anything could be anything, right? And then you could just have one single. This is where beholder doesn't really matter, right? Or not being an eye doesn't matter, or not being a horror doesn't matter because there's no horror tribal or eye tribal. But then as soon as you come make the card that is tribal for that tribe, you go, but why couldn't this card and this card and this card be a part of it? Because it makes sense. And again, it's that question of is diversity better than succinctness? And again, we continue to not find an answer to that question.
I think it's interesting to see that they've used gnome as a creature type in this set for things that aren't artifacts, because usually it's gnomes have been artifact creatures classically in
Yeah.
Magic.
Well,
So it's nice that they're not.
I looked them up, and
So
there's some old ones that are a bit strange, but yeah, for the most part, they are typically artifacts only.
And also, one last thing about bards, just talking about creature types. Obviously, we have been talking a lot over the past year about what artists and things would be in Magic. But this sort of during, before, and after we saw more artists and musicians being represented in Magic without them just being like tricksters or like, people who like entranced animals and other people to beguile them. So it's kind of cool to see bards back in again. Notice how they're in every color except for white? Question mark.
Yeah, very
Are they?
interesting.
They're in black, blue. They're in black, green, and red in various iterations. So, are there any blue ones? Hang on, let me just look that up. Pretty sure they're not.
I've got like 4 different creature type tabs open.
No, yeah. So yeah, no, yeah. They're. So we've got a red one, we've got 2 green ones, and we've got a black red one.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with the black red one because does it just being a pain to make you a bard? This is almost like the opposite of what I wanted, right? Where I'm like, cool, I want more representation, I want more painters, I want more poets, which they are. There are poets in this set, there are painters in this set.
Storytellers.
Yeah,
they're artistic storytellers.
Yeah,
I think that counts as a bard.
Sure. I mean, there is even like a journalist within the set, which I think is quite cool. The what's his name? Volo, Guide to Monsters.
Volo, yeah.
Which is a throwback to the book Guide to Monsters. Whereas his actual name is Volothamp Gadam, which I'm like, put the name on Volothamp Gadam. What a name!
Well, no, because then that doesn't evoke the book.
No, I know. No, that's what I mean. And this again, this is why I understand why they did it. But it was interesting when I went to search up. I've literally got it's capitalized, like with bold writing, Volothamp Gadam. Quick, one thing we didn't mention going back. Apparently, rangers are now a thing outside of archers, which is another interesting fact that they keep doing this distinction between, which I'm completely behind. It's just interesting when certain things become like, again, dragonkin being dragons, whereas then you separate archers from rangers, and it's like, this is where I'm like, give us an article where you define what where it is, because Korean Ranger is a ranger now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't, for some reason I didn't notice it when we did Modern Horizons episode, because it would have been a signifier for going, oh, okay, so clearly they're just going to do ranger classes in D&D set. We should have seen it coming. But it is just funny that certain things get it way after time and certain things get it when they don't feel like they need it. But again, more classes I don't think you can go wrong with. Creature typing is where maybe it gets a bit more difficult, because I feel like creature typing should be more succinct, whereas classing, don't really give a shit. You can be any job you like, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, diversity in classes would be quite cool. Yeah, creature types, I think, just maybe, just for the sake of the mechanics of the game, need to be maybe just clipped or refined or something. I don't know. We'll see. Cool. This is tough. There's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons lore, apparently.
Yeah,
that's very hard to pass.
We've skimmed the surface. We haven't even gone to like depth about certain things we've talked about today. But as you can see, there's plenty to get into. And when we talk next week about some Flavour highlights, we can maybe go into some more depth about certain things that we didn't get to today.
Yeah. Effectively, if we're talking just as people who know about Magic and know teeny weeny minuscule amount of Dungeons and Dragons, looking at this set both mechanically and flavorfully, I think this is about as near the mark as they could have got it, without basically just completely rewriting how Magic the Gathering is played and making it like basically like Dungeons and Dragons but with cards. It's like Gloomhaven. Essentially, if you want to do this, play Gloomhaven.
Yeah. Because I feel like they did a good enough job of making it feel just different enough. Yes, okay, basic things like D20 and dungeons, okay, but they do these gimmicks with every fucking Magic set. Like, you're not telling me that this feels very different to other, as I say, we've talked about Lessons, we've talked about Mutate. Like, each set seems to have its weird non-grokkable mechanic, and if anyone's kicking back about these ones, even though these ones are actually way more grokkable because they're way more in people's more immediate awareness, like D20 and rolling dice isn't something that's completely different. This idea of decision tree cards, like, we have so many different cards in Magic that do either this or this, and then adding the added flavor, as we spoke last week, probably makes the card even more playable or more easily playable than just having an arbitrary choice of 2 options. You know, I feel like they did a very good job of making the cards feel just alien enough for you to notice that it's not a typical Magic set, while still feeling very much like it will play like a nice intricate Magic set.
I agree. Oh, okay, I think that might just about do it. I'm very aware, if you've made it this far into the episode and you're still with us and you still have any respect for us whatsoever as people who care about lore and story, I salute you, because this has been a tough one to get through and have any sort of semblance of love knowing what we're talking about. This is very out of my comfort zone. Like, usually we can go into these at this point. We're like 79 episodes in, and usually we can go into these with like decent sort of conversation and prep throughout the week. But basically, us going, we know what we want to say. We know how we're going to approach this. And this week has just been, like, it's exciting. I'm really excited about it, but also at the same time, it's daunting, and you can see why. And this is maybe something that's maybe a little bit too heavy for this episode, I suppose. But you can see why with things like Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons or like bloody Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or any of these big old fandoms, you can see why it is really important to be welcoming and open-armed to new people coming in, and to like this whole idea of people being accused of gatekeeping their fandoms, or like genuinely gatekeeping them, or feeling like they're being attacked, or this, that, and the other. Like, I think it's all just, you have to be so open and so like kind to new people coming in that any sense of like, what do you mean you don't know how to pronounce that word, is just not good. Do you know what I mean?
Because it's automatically intimidating. Like, these are really big IPs and really big worlds. And I do this all the time, of where someone starts talking to me about Magic, and within 3 sentences, I've gone like five layers too deep for them to even keep up with me. And I'd rather do that and be like, oh no, and almost like give them an example of just how impassioned you can be about something, to turn around and be like, oh, you wouldn't get it, don't worry. You know, like that. That's not how you get people to invest into your world, right? I mean, and you need the ones to be invested into to get bigger and to get more expansive. Like, there's no ownership over something like this. The only ownership you can have is over your own knowledge, and all you can do is kind of better that yourself by engaging with other people, talking about it more. And as you say, going into this kind of breakdown, there was a lot of cards I was like, I don't even know if I'm missing something here. Like, should I look like everything I want to look at? I'm like, shit, do I need to do some research on this, or like, or is the name coming from somewhere else? Because I don't want to do a disservice to those that are listening that do have a much greater knowledge about D&D. All realistically we can do is look at this from the lens of a Magic player and see how much enjoyment and engagement we're getting from a D&D perspective. And I think, as we just said, it hit the nail on the head. And twinning these two things together is very long overdue. They're two massive IPs for Wizards. I'm surprised it's taken them this long. And even then, I feel a little bit of kickback, or a little bit of pushback. You know, I feel like there's a lot of people that are out there going, oh, I'm not too interested in the set. I mean, I think there's a very deliberate power down with the set anyway. Like, they've had to do that over the last, and this is a good set to do it with, because there's a lot of inherent flavor, and it's going to put a lot of people to want to play the set regardless of whether or not it's stronger or weaker.
Imagine if rolling a D20 was so pushed that it became like legacy viable.
Yeah, right. Or if dungeons were in every format, like, it just doesn't. It's again, if you're going to make a super flavorful set, probably power it down anyway, because it's going to make games more complicated and longer. In the same way of don't introduce fetches into every set, otherwise every tournament play is just shuffling and shuffling and shuffling. Right? You've got to have almost an outside awareness of how your game's going to be received and played and engaged with, which I imagine for Wizards, this must be quite nerve-wracking for them, because this is a kind of set that could really hit the mark, or it could really miss, and if it misses, it's hurting two different fandoms, right? So to kind of help them along with that, let's have the two fandoms combine forces rather than be at odds with one another.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just that's the message, I guess, is just be open with your fandoms, and you get cool shit like Magic the Gathering, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Guys, if you want to chat to us about all the stuff that we missed and bug it up in a nice way, please, about this set, then contact us via our Twitter, is at mtflavouring. You can also send emails to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Nathan, your Twitter email,
at the Fox in the Moon.
My Twitter is at AndyManface. I've been playing on the Switch the 1999 Nintendo 64 classic Switch port now of Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which is the pod racer game.
Fuck off, really? Amazing.
It's on the Switch, and I remember I had the cartridge for the N64, and I played the shit out of it. It ruined one of my controllers because it's so freaking fast. And now I've been playing it on the Switch, and it is badass.
Oh, okay, I'll have to do that.
So good. Yeah, it's like 12 quid.
Yeah, the plan was to do new Pokemon Snap, but I don't really want to pay 60 quid for the digital copy. So yeah, no, Star Wars Racer sounds way more valuable. It's
really fun. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. It was Cthulhu that actually hit me up on Twitter about a month ago and was like, you know, this is coming out. I think did they mention it? I think they mentioned there was some Twitter thing going around like what 4 games like shaped your childhood, and I put Pod Racer down as one of them. And they were like, oh, that's a game that I played, and I was like, sick. They were like, yeah, it's going to be coming out on the Switch. What? And now we're here. So yeah, there we go. So thank you, Cthulhu. All right, well, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.